Hi, my name is Mark Liebman. I'm a retired Navy captain and naval aviator, and I'm also a historian and a novelist with 14 novels out on the marketplace. And some of them are about have themes that are about the subject of this video, which is about Iran, the terrorist go-to sponsor. And the reason I say that is because Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world today. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. I'm not going to get into the religious aspects of this other than to talk on a peripheral. And this is based on facts as I see them today as I'm recording this, which is January 22nd, 2024. So Iran is a theocracy. It's a country that's governed by a religious doctrine, the Quran, and it's a democracy only in the name only, because its religious leaders, as you're going to see in a minute, control who runs for office, hold most, if not all, the key government posts. They enforce dress codes and other cultural aspects to conform to Sharia law and the Quran. And also religious leaders control the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Quds Force, as well as the conventional military. So net, Iran is a representative democracy in name only. So this is probably the best chart I've ever seen about how the Iranian government actually works. So at the top you have the supreme leader, that happens to be the Ayatollah Khamenei. And note the gray lines. He controls the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council, and when I say controls, he controls who sits on it. And the Guardian Council vets candidates and decides who can run for office. They also vet whatever legislation both the parliament will actually sit. So if you want to run for a parliament seat or an assembly of experts, you have to be approved by the Guardian Council, which by definition means you have to be approved by the supreme leader, which is the Ayatollah Khamenei. So if you're in parliament, you owe it to Khamenei. If you're in assembly of experts, you owe it to Khamenei. If you're in the Guardian Council, you owe it to this guy. So he also has an expediency council which mediates disputes, and guess what? He appoints all those as well. So pretty much you as a voter are at the mercy in terms of your candidates of the gentleman at the top of the country. So this is why it's not really a democracy. It is in fact a theocracy, and in this case an authoritarian dictatorship. So let's talk about the military of Iran. It's really in three separate buckets. There's the conventional military, which was formed under its leaders before the Islamic Revolution, and it's relatively small, but it's there and has a role. And then you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard forces. And to get in the Guard forces, the IRGC as it's known, one of the things you have to do is prove yourself or prove your religious fervor, because that's one of the primary requirements to stay and also get promoted in the IRGC. It has its own separate ground force, Navy, Air Force, and it has a paramilitary force of about 600,000 that they claim they can bring on when they actually mobilize, or if they need to mobilize to fight a war. The Quds Force is a separate organization entirely. It's about 17,000 to 20,000, depending on which source you want to believe. Just when you think of the Quds Force, think of the USA, CIA, and Special Operations Command combined. It does a lot of different things besides special ops. In fact, it runs a lot of the paramilitary organizations. It also does a fair amount of procurement. It runs safe houses, dummy corporations, and all kinds of other things to hide what the Iranian government is doing. And also, like the IRGC, they provide advisors to terrorist organizations in other countries. So these are two quotes from the original founder of the original ruler, of Iran's Islamic Republic, and that's the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And this tells you all you need to know about Iran's motives and goals, because they haven't changed since he took power. And they're all based on the Quran and what's in the Quran. So this next slide is, here's where the hatred comes from. And I'm going to pause here for about 10 or 15 seconds and let you read it. This is by clause. This is English translations of the Arabic. And you can see why and where a lot of this hatred comes from, because this is what's taught to kids in madrasas and kids in schools. So fact one, I said earlier in this broadcast or this podcast that the Islamic Republic of Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So why do I say that? Well, look at a map. This is straight from several different sources. One is the CIA fact book, another is the Council of Foreign Relations. And just looking up where we have seen the Quds Force or the IRGC active in the past 5 years. And there's 25 countries that are on this map, and the actual number is growing. So a lot of it's in the Middle East, some in Europe, some in North and South America. And yes, the United States is one of those countries. The United States intelligence community has identified at least 20 Iranian-backed terrorist organizations in just the Middle East. Now, most of you have heard of Hezbollah, you've heard of Hamas, and you may have heard of Islamic Jihad, and recently the Houthis have been in the news. But this is the list of the others, and this is not a complete list, because many times they will conduct an attack, and then they'll claim, the people who conducted the attack will claim it in the name of some organization that nobody's ever heard of. Part of this is done as deception, part of this is just done because it is a new organization, but a lot of these organizations have been around for years, and some are relatively new. But again, this is just 20, and pretty much every year we're finding out there's another one or two or three. So I want to talk about the two biggest, which is Hamas and Hezbollah. And they have a common goal, which is the destruction of Israel. They're different. Hamas basically has been in the news because it's primarily in Gaza. Hezbollah is primarily in southern Lebanon. They're different in size. They actually, for years, until the past couple of years, didn't like each other, yet most of their funding now comes from Iran. Depending whether it's Hamas, which is about 93%, or Hezbollah, which is 97%. And Iran provides weapons, training, it provides logistics support, it provides safe houses, documentations, intelligence, a host of other things. And this is what's sitting right now outside the country of Israel. And the top group is the one that launched the attack on October 7th. Fact two. Iran has been a problem for U.S. foreign policy, and in many cases for the past 15 years, we have been a facilitator of Iran's bad behavior, and I'll explain why. So since 1980, when the Islamic Republic came into power, we have had more or less an undeclared war. Yes, during the Iran-Iraq war, we helped the Iraqis, but we also helped facilitate sending bits and pieces to Iran to keep their U.S. airplanes flying to provide some balance of power. That was the core of the Iran-Contra, the Iran-Contra scandal during the Reagan administration. But you can see all these events that have happened since 1980 that suggest that we have been at war with Iran and its proxies since then. And right now, we're launching airstrikes as we speak, or have just launched airstrikes against the Houthis in southern Yemen. We're launching airstrikes against IRG-supported groups in Syria and in Iraq. It just goes on and on and on. So over the past 15 years, and I'm using 15 plus years because it's the last three presidents, our foreign policy has changed dramatically. So before Obama, it was pretty much sanctions, put pressure on Iran, forced regime change, ultimately, hopefully, by restricting its ability to generate income and limit its income that it could gain through sale of oil. That changed with Obama. So he reversed the containment of the prior three presidents. He thought he could negotiate a nuclear arms deal to keep Iran from getting a deliverable nuclear weapon. It was called the JPOA. It never went to Congress for approval as a treaty because he knew it would never get passed. And also he did this against the advice of the Israelis, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, which is countries like Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and UAE. And then he also gave sanctions relief and allowed the Iranians to get access to money that had been sanctioned. And so he unfroze those assets. And then also, when Iranian protesters took to the streets over various issues, he was silent. He did not support them. And if he had, just using the bully pulpit, forget about anything else, he would have provided support for them and maybe put more pressure on the Iranian regime. So in comes Donald Trump. He reimposes sanctions and actually added sanctions from the prior administration, added to the sanctions from the prior administration. He pulled out of the JPOA. He took a much more confrontational policy towards Iran because he recognized what it was. And then he authorized the attack that killed Soleimani, the head of the IRGC. And by the end of his term, the Iranian economy was damn near collapse. And Trump did something else. He facilitated what we now know as the Abraham Accords. That's a subject of a whole nother discussion. But in terms of U.S. foreign policy, that was a groundbreaking event, which, by the way, has survived since then. And it will ultimately expand to bring in other countries in the region. So Biden enters office. The first thing he does is he attempts to restart the JPOA. He gave Iran sanctions relief and, again, access to cash, which, again, kept the Iranian economy from collapsing. He paid for hostages. So more money went to Iran. Guess where it went? It went to the IRGC. It went to the Quds Force. It went to terrorists. He embarrassed the Saudis over the Khashoggi Association, which caused a lot of heartburn in Riyadh, and it caused them to delay joining the Abraham Accords, which they had committed to do. And then again, in the protests when the women were taking the streets about wearing hijabs and niqabs and other requirements, he failed to use his bully pulpit to support them and to again put pressure on the regime. So what you see here is going from one extreme to the other, and it's almost like whiplash. So you can say the Iranians are confused. I don't believe they are. I believe they're taking advantage of the situation. So what has happened is our actions have emboldened Iran and its proxies. They see us weak and distracted, particularly by the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, and also the president willing to sell out his Middle Eastern allies to negotiate a nuclear deal. They saw this with Obama, and then they're seeing it again with Biden. So this gives them an opportunity to drive wedges between the U.S. and its traditional allies, and it's not just Israel. There are countries in the GCC, there's Jordan, Egypt, other Muslim countries that have been supportive, if not behind the scenes, openly, of U.S. Actions in the Middle East. They're using proxies to attack us, a la the Houthis. They're striking at our forces with their own rockets and using Syrian rebels and ISIS. They're pressuring the Iraqi government to force us to leave the U.S. bases that we're using to fight ISIS and support the anti-Assad rebels. They're putting pressure on to Saudi Arabia to keep them from joining the Abraham Accords. And ultimately, if Hezbollah gets into this conflict that started on October 7th, they're going to force Israel to fight a two-front war. So this has all been the result of policies in the United States that changed every 4 to 8 years. So this is all, in my mind, raises 4 questions that the Biden administration must answer, and they must answer before the next election. And number one is what is it going to do to force Iran to stop supporting terrorism? Right now, it's not doing anything. Okay, what it's trying to do is step back and negotiate with them and talk to them, but they actually need to take steps to force Iran to realize that this is not acceptable behavior. The second thing is that when the attack on October 7th started, the U.S. government, I have the intelligence community, but it's actually the Biden administration, said we had no information that the Iranians were involved. Anybody who's been in the special forces, who has helped train a foreign government's armed forces and been there for 15 years, when you're training, equipping, and funding and providing logistics support, that answer just doesn't fly. It doesn't pass the smell test. There's no doubt in anybody's mind who's ever done this before that Iran was heavily involved. Now, they may not have been on the ground conducting the attacks, but they knew, they supported, and they trained. So then the next thing is, this set off a whole series of anti-Semitic actions in the United States where protesters are urging others to kill Jews. Why is this important? Well, they're claiming they can do this under the First Amendment rights to free speech. That is not true. The Supreme Court has made it very clear that your limits to free speech end when you incite somebody to commit an illegal act or a crime, commit fraud, use obscenities, use hate speech. That's when your freedom of speech under the First Amendment go away. And so where is the U.S. Justice Department in prosecuting people? And then the last thing is, it's already become evident that a lot of terrorists have come across the southern border, which is basically an open door, and The Biden administration admits that they found 269 who are on terrorist watch lists of various kinds, and they've been apprehended. So the question is, how many more are here that we don't know about? So these are all questions that we need to ask. And one of the real reason behind this video is we need to put pressure on whoever is in power in the United States to stop Iran, force regime change, or at least force them to stop supporting terrorists throughout the world. So this last slide is a picture of all the titles of my books that are out there. Red Star of Death, which will be out in January 2024, is not on here. The ones, the counterterrorism series, all deal with Islamic terrorism. Jaco Jacinto's Age of Sail series is about the American Revolution. And the Josh Heyman series deals with, or follows the career of a young naval officer from 1970 off the coast of Vietnam to off the coast of Korea in 1996. It has some counterterrorism in it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you buy my books.